Every human being who has ever slept has had this exact nightmare. Not a version of it. The exact same one. Something is chasing you. It catches you. It starts to eat you alive, and you cannot move. That single dream shows up in the overwhelming majority of nightmare studies across every culture ever surveyed. And by the end of this video, you'll know the specific evolutionary machinery in your brain that manufactures it every single night, whether or not anything on Earth is actually trying to eat you. Here's what should bother you about that. Sleep is supposed to be the one time your body gets to stand down. Heart rate drops, muscles relax, digestion slows, rest, recovery, repair. So why would the brain, in the middle of all that shutting down, choose to manufacture the single most terrifying scenario it can invent, and then force you to experience it, alone, paralyzed, with nowhere to run? For most of the 20th century, the answer psychologists gave you was that it doesn't matter. Dreams, Freud argued, were wish fulfillment wearing a disguise, random symbolic noise your unconscious mind was working through. Later researchers said dreaming was just the brain doing electrical housekeeping while it slept, random neurons firing, and the story your mind built around that static was essentially meaningless. Under that theory, being eaten alive in a dream is just noise your brain happened to shape into a monster. But that explanation has a problem it can't get around. If nightmares were random noise, the content should be random too. It isn't. Ask people from Finland, from the Kalahari, from suburban Ohio to describe their worst recurring nightmare, and an overwhelming majority describe the same plot: being pursued by something with intent to harm and being unable to escape. Random noise doesn't organize itself into the same three-act structure in every human brain on Earth. Something else is writing that script. Finnish cognitive scientist Antti Revonsuo proposed a different answer entirely: threat simulation theory. His argument was that dreaming isn't noise at all. It's rehearsal. Specifically, rehearsal for the single event most likely to end your life before you got a chance to reproduce: predation. The amygdala, the almond-shaped structure that governs fear, doesn't switch off during REM sleep. It becomes more active than it is while you're awake, running a threat simulation, a nightly fire drill for the exact scenario your ancestors were most likely to actually die from. And for most of human history, that scenario wasn't hypothetical. Paleoanthropologists estimate that predation was a leading cause of death for early hominins for millions of years, long before anything resembling a modern human existed. We weren't apex predators. We were, for most of our evolutionary history, prey. And the fossil record doesn't just suggest that. In at least one case, it shows you the exact moment it happened. In 1924, a skull was pulled out of a limestone quarry in South Africa belonging to a 2 to 3-year-old hominin child who died roughly 2.5 million years ago. For decades, nobody could explain the strange puncture marks on the skull. Then researchers matched them to something specific: talon marks. Identical to the ones modern eagles leave on monkey skulls today. That child was killed and carried off by a bird of prey. That single skull rewired how anthropologists think about early human childhood, because it means the nightmare of being snatched, lifted, and carried off by something with talons or teeth wasn't a metaphor for early hominins. It was a documented physical cause of death for their children. But here's the question that actually matters for this video. That child died 2.5 million years ago. The eagles that hunted hominin children are gone. So why does that exact dream still show up in a suburban bedroom in 2024? Long before anyone could answer that scientifically, entire civilizations were already answering it symbolically. Nearly every ancient mythology on Earth contains some version of a being swallowed whole. The underworld serpent in Mesopotamian myth doesn't just kill you, it ingests you. Aboriginal Dreamtime stories describe ancestral beings who devour the unwary whole and regurgitate them transformed. These aren't isolated coincidences swapped between neighboring cultures. These stories emerged independently, on different continents, among people who never made contact with each other, which means they weren't copying a myth. They were describing the same recurring internal experience and giving it the only language available: gods, monsters, the underworld. The story changed. The plot, being consumed, losing total control of your own body, stayed identical everywhere. Which brings us back to the actual mystery. Modern nightmare researchers, running sleep lab studies decades after Revonsuo's theory, kept finding the exact same content showing up in people who have never once in their life encountered a predator. Nightmare researchers Tor Nielsen and Ross Levin found that being chased remains one of the single most common nightmare themes recorded across modern populations, right alongside falling and drowning. Nobody in a modern city is being stalked by a leopard, but the dream doesn't know that. In fact, in one large-scale nightmare content analysis, physical aggression from another party appeared in over 75% of all recorded nightmares, and being unable to move or escape appeared in a majority of them too. That's not a coincidence of modern anxiety. That is the exact structure of a predation event: pursuit, contact, immobilization. Your brain is still running a drill for a threat that, statistically, has not existed in your environment for tens of thousands of years. Why hasn't the drill been canceled? Because evolution doesn't work on a deadline, and it definitely doesn't read the news. The amygdala's threat template was built over millions of years in which predation was the single most reliable way for a hominin, especially a child, to die before passing on their genes. Natural selection doesn't erase circuitry the moment the threat disappears. It only erases circuitry that actively costs you reproductive success, and a bad dream, however terrifying, has never once stopped anyone from having children the next morning. There's a second piece of this machinery that makes even more sense once you know what it's rehearsing for. During REM sleep, your brainstem actively paralyzes your major muscle groups, a condition called REM atonia. Most people experience it only as the horrifying inability to run during a nightmare, but that paralysis isn't a malfunction. It's a safety switch. A brain running a full sensory simulation of being hunted needs your actual body to stay perfectly still in the actual bed, or every single nightmare would end in a sleepwalking injury. Put those two pieces together and the picture gets uncomfortably specific. The amygdala runs a predation simulation because predation, not disease, not famine, not violence from other humans, was for millions of years the leading engineered threat to a hominin's survival. The brainstem locks the body down so that simulation can run at full intensity without getting you killed for real. The exact same neural architecture that let a hominin mother startle awake at a snapped branch 2 million years ago is still installed in you, running the same test on a threat that technically retired. Which means when you wake up at 3 a.m., with your heart slamming from a dream about being caught, you are not malfunctioning. You are not weak, and you are definitely not imagining a random threat. You are the current endpoint of an unbroken chain of ancestors, every single one of whom survived long enough to reproduce partly because their brain took that exact nightmare seriously. That's the actual answer to why ancient humans dreamed of being eaten alive. It was never a story. It was a rehearsal drill installed by the deaths of every hominin who failed to wake up, freeze, and fight in time. And the drill still runs tonight, in your bed, for a predator that hasn't existed on this planet for 10,000 years because your genome never got the update. The nightmare didn't get left behind in the past. It's the one piece of the past that never left you. And it explains something else. Why nightmares peak specifically between ages 3 and 6, the exact developmental window in which a hominin child was smallest, slowest, and most likely to be someone's meal. Your worst dreams aren't evenly distributed across your life. They cluster at the exact age your ancestors were most likely to be carried off. Thanks for spending this one with us. If you want to keep going, there's another story just like this one waiting right now. Go ahead and press play.